Hi everyone, welcome.
Kaylee wants to be told when to start. Kaylee wants to be told when to start.
You're live. Welcome everyone.
Hi everyone, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to you all to the annual SAIIA Careers event. My name is Katie Clifford. I'm a researcher at SAIIA, but I'm also a former SAIIA scholar, and so it's a real privilege for me to be here today to moderate this event. The Careers event happens every year. It's a joint initiative by the South African Institute of International Affairs and the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and it's really a platform for university students, both undergraduate and postgraduate, to learn more and gain more insight into what opportunities may be available to them. These are students that are studying international relations, economics, law, communications, and more. And so over the years, the interest in this annual event has been really quite amazing. I think we've all at some point grappled with questions around our careers, doubts about whether we're on the right path. I think this is a really wonderful opportunity for us to collectively engage and share some advice. This year, in fact, the current scholars have been hard at work putting together resources onto a web page. And these are tips and tricks of the trade to help you maximize your chances of finding work while you're studying or after your studies. We also have contributions from exhibitors, the likes of the Institute for Security Studies and the Parliamentary Monitoring Group. These are organizations that work in fields that are relevant to our studies and who have shared on the website more about the work that they do and opportunities that may be available at their organizations. So a big thank you to our CAS scholars and to CAS for putting that web page together. It's a wonderful resource, and I would really encourage all of you to go over and have a look at that. We're going to post the link in the chat box. But this year, the Careers event also has a really interesting theme. We're going to be talking about careers in transition, a post-pandemic green economy and implications for the working world. This, I think, is extremely relevant as we start to think about, what the working world can look like after COVID and how we're going to navigate this while also growing our economy sustainably. So I'm very excited about the upcoming program, and without any further ado, I want to welcome our first speaker for the afternoon. Ronak Gopaldas is director at Signal Risk, a fellow at Gibbs Business School, and the co-founder of Mindflux Training. He was previously the head of country risk at Rand Merchant Bank, where he worked for almost a decade. He's a political economist, pro-academic, and writer and speaker. His work focuses on the intersection of politics, economics, and business in Africa. He's a prominent voice in print, radio, and television on both local and international media, and has made frequent appearances on the likes of CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, and CNBC Africa. He also publishes regular opinion and analysis pieces. Ronak, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, guys. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and looking forward to sharing some thoughts. Obviously, pretty difficult to do this while the country's burning, given everything that's happening all around us. But looking forward to the engagement in the Q&A as well. So I thought I'd keep it quite simple today, and really look to answer a few questions about kind of what I do, how I got to where I am, and place that in the context of what's happening in South Africa, in Africa, and the world at large. So I wanted to focus really on my journey and how I got to what I was doing post-university, then talk a little bit about my corporate journey, a bit about my entrepreneurial journey, and the Africa of the future, and what skills I think are going to be necessary for young people to navigate this successfully. So as you've mentioned, you've kind of read my bio. These days, I go by the title of Corporate Sangoma. Obviously, I'm an ex-investment banker, an analyst by trade. These days, what I'm doing is a bit of academic work. I run a risk consultancy, some speaking and some writing. My mom calls me a modern millennial. I call it a portfolio of careers, and people who don't understand say I'm freelancing. And as a brown person who's not a lawyer, an accountant, an engineer, or a doctor, a lot of people find this career choice a little bit odd or off center. And it's I guess quite unconventional. But I've always had an interest in news and current affairs and general knowledge. I get bored very easily, and I'm extremely curious. And growing up, I used to read the newspapers religiously and discuss that with my dad every evening. So when I went to university, I studied a PPE, politics, philosophy, and economics, or as my friends termed it, party, etc. And at university, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I liked writing, I liked reading, and I tried to make sense of that. And I ended up in banking really by accident. I wanted to be a diplomat or a journalist, and then I realized, banking actually could accommodate me, and I like things like sushi and wine. And I ended up at Rand Merchant Bank on their graduate program, and my timing was great because that's when the bank was launching its Africa strategy. It was tricky timing with the financial crisis, and this was in 2009. South Africa was in recession, and I was extremely grateful to have a job. It was a kind of whole big, brave new world, big business, highly professional, would wear a suit to work every day. And I was really the first graduate in my family. I come from a family of business. And so when I talk about policy conundrums and dilemmas and social contracts and fiscal and monetary policy, my dad looks at me quizzically because he buys for one and he sells for two. And I think that's probably a challenge that many of you coming out into the working world are going to face as you enter this knowledge economy and the services economy, where you come from environments where you're dealing really with the real economy. And that's an interesting cultural challenge. It's an interesting transition to make, and one that is quite ambiguous and often difficult to navigate. So I ended up at Rand Merchant Bank, as I mentioned, and honestly, I was extremely fortunate because it was pretty much my dream job. I did all the things I liked. I had an amazing boss. I dealt with politics, economics, business. I applied the qualitative and the quantitative aspects of my degrees. I was traveling the world. I went to 30 African countries when I was there. My work was interesting. And I did things like assessing oil crises in Nigeria, to the economic impact of Ebola, to presidents dying in office. Spoke at Oxford and Harvard, was surrounded by smart people, and honestly, it was as if I landed with my bum in the butter. It was extremely cushy. And I was at RMB for 8 years, and I guess you could say I was probably quite successful when I was there. I realized that I wasn't necessarily the smartest guy around, or the most technical guy around, but what I was able to do is really understand my comparative advantages. I knew that I was hardworking, I knew that I was confident, and I knew that I had the ability to connect the dots and translate between different worlds, the public sector, the private sector, big picture stuff to stuff at the coalface. And I think that is what I recognized quite early on was a skill of mine. And then, one of the things that I think is often overlooked is the importance of good manners. Good manners will open up doors that even the best education cannot. And I think, this only pays up down the line, but I think it's an extremely important lesson that I figured out when I was at RMB. Of course, I can sit back and say that I was lucky and I was successful, but I think to succeed at any big organization, you really need a combination of three things. So, work ethic, I think that's non-negotiable. I think you need pure blind luck. And like I say, I was at the right place at the right time. I had bosses who backed me, who opened up doors for me. And I think that's also really important. You need a sponsor who's going to be able to facilitate a path towards success for you. So I was at RMB, like I said, for almost a decade. And the big things that I took out of that corporate career was that iron sharpens iron. You're surrounded by extremely smart, extremely ambitious people. And that really does begin to rub off on you in terms of the way you think and the way you process thoughts and the way you interact. I think the platforms and the credibility and the networks that you build when you're working in this big machine, and and you've got this platform is remarkable. And then I think very importantly, especially for young people, is learning how to deal with conflict. And here I think it's very important to distinguish between task conflict and relationship conflict. And the sooner that you can recognize and realize this, I think the easier it is to really become successful, not only in a corporate setting, but in general in life. Because I think this is a very important tool that we often tend to mix up. And there's a book I'm currently reading called Think Again by Adam Grant, which I highly recommend if you can get your hands on, which really unpacks this in quite a lot of detail. So that was pretty much my corporate career at RMB. Had a great innings there, but I turned 30 and asked myself the question, is this it? I was an analyst. I was the head of country risk. I sat on the management board, and I just kind of woke up feeling a little bit uninspired. As you get more senior in an organization, you deal with a lot more bureaucracy. And I felt that I was becoming stale and static. I was a big fish in a small pond, and I wanted to test myself against the best and the brightest in the world and see how good I really was. And so I wanted to start a new chapter. And, it was a lot of anxiety around this decision. Am I being smart? Am I being stupid? Am I being brave? And eventually I quit my job. I decided I wanted to live in London. And I got to London, no plan, no job, earning rands, getting anxious when I was buying coffee. And that was a very humbling experience, because hitting reset and starting all over again, I think was probably the best thing I could have done. Because, when you come to a new city, nothing really goes according to plan initially. Nobody recognizes what you did back home. The career opportunities that come across your doorsteps are 2 steps back. And I think that really prompted me to say, okay, I'm going to try forge my own path and do something entrepreneurial. And so I didn't have a plan, but what I had to do was really jump out of the plane and stitch the parachute metaphorically on the way down. And whether I was brave or stupid, I don't know, but it really was a big mental shift for me, because I had to forget what I had achieved in the past and stop being anxious about the future and surrender to the process and trust the process. And I think there was a big lesson here in terms of doing the basics right, investing in relationships and learning from the journey. And I think compared to when I was in a corporate environment, what really emerged was that I had to get comfortable and wrestle with the fear of failure. I realized that success was not permanent and failure was not fatal. The path was not linear, and that I needed to drop this perfection at all costs mindset. Things didn't go according to plan. And I think a big lesson is, the second point is to really get comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity and gray areas, because, that's life. It's, you're going to have speed bumps and potholes along the way, and you're going to have to develop the resilience to navigate those. And then the third element I think that was really important is the value of relationships and reputation, because a lot of the clients that I ended up getting as part of Signal Risk were either from referrals of people who I'd worked with or old clients who I presented to. And I think, when you under-promise and over-deliver, I think your reputation is something that carries through with you perpetually. And I think that was a really, really important lesson. And if I can stress something more than anything, invest in your relationships in a way that is genuine and authentic and not transactional. So I think, looking ahead, if we look at the Africa of the future and the workforce that you guys are going to enter into, I think Africa's population is going to double by 2050. And that's creating a whole bunch of anxiety around whether it's sustainable in light of the demographics that we've got on our doorstep. Either this is an opportunity or a significant risk. And, we've got a young population, We are seeing surges in technology, innovation, this rapid urbanization. But if we don't create the jobs and inclusive growth, then we're going to end up in a bit of a disaster zone. And we're seeing the effects of this playing out in South Africa at the moment. So I think it's really up to us as Africans to chart our own future, whether we're going to be victims or victors, winners or losers, or bystanders or masters in our own future. And I think the pandemic has really accelerated a number of trends, namely in digitization, in innovation, and localization. We are living on a continent where currently we're not industrialized, and there's huge opportunity. And there's huge opportunity to do well and to do good. But what we need really is African solutions to African problems. And we have to back solve from the very, very important and urgent priority of politics of the stomach. Because as we're seeing in South Africa at the moment, when the poor have nothing to eat, they eat the rich. What's quite clear, though, is that we can't continue to do things the way that we always have. We need to be smarter and more innovative about this and hack the ladder to prosperity. And I think in this context, I would urge you all to really focus on what the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is trying to achieve, because that presents a vision and a roadmap of the future. Of course, it's going to be incremental and progress will be slow, but I think that gives us something to aspire to. The size and scale is too significant to ignore. I think there is political momentum, and most importantly, it is an African solution to an African problem. I think in that context, innovation becomes extremely important, particularly what I call the technicolor economy, where it's the green economy, food security and renewable energy is critical. The blue economy, pretty obvious, the ocean economy, tourism, aquaculture is undertapped. The purple economy, which is the cultural, media, entertainment, and fashion economy, and we're seeing global talent from Africa making it on a big stage, whether it's Burna Boy, Trevor Noah, Lupita Nyong'o, Black Coffee. Then there's the flat white economy, which is the digital economy. And then finally, the gray economy, which is the informal economy. And I think, if we focus on these undertapped and underexploited sectors, which have huge potential to create jobs, to create economic wealth under the broad umbrella of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, then I think we really have something meaningful that we can leverage in order to create jobs and significant growth and prosperity on the continent. I think the last element that I want to leave you with before I close off is the importance of leadership. And I think, you guys are bright people, you're educated, you are going to be successful in the work that you do. But what Africa needs is not successful leaders, it needs significant leaders who are going to have impact beyond themselves and an impact on wider society. And I think in that context, that would be my challenge to you as young people coming out into an extremely fractured world, a world where we're seeing through the pandemic, huge amount of suffering, economic chaos, weak political leadership. And the continent's future is going to be forged by the quality of leadership that emerges. We are a young continent. We are a continent that's crying out for younger leaders, and leaders who are tech savvy, female, and people who are going to aspire to be significant rather than purely successful. And I think I will leave it there, and then we can take questions a little bit later.
Thanks so much, Ronak. I really like your reference to growing up wanting to be a diplomat. I think for many of us who studied international relations or politics, this was kind of the dream. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's also important to acknowledge that there are other opportunities that are just as worthwhile, that allow us to remain engaged with the topics that we're passionate about. But I also like that you've basically highlighted that it's okay to start again, that we don't have to have everything figured out from the get-go, and it's okay to change our minds. And in fact, with the current climate, may be necessary to change your mind and to adapt as circumstances change. So thanks for that. I also want to just remind our audience that we will have a Q&A session later on. So if you have any questions for Ronak or for any of our other speakers, please feel free to drop those in the chat box and we'll see how many we can get to. I'm going to move now to our next speaker, Farah Mubaiwa, and I want to hand over to her. Farah is a project management lead at the Youth Employment Service. It's a business-led NPO that works in partnership with government and Labour to initiate policy changes and incentivize the creation of jobs for youth. She's also the co-founder of the youth-led organization Africa Matters, which empowers young Africans to lead through leadership skills, capacity building, and community impact projects. Farah was a Queen's Young Leader for South Africa in 2017, a TEDx speaker, a One Young World Ambassador, and a King's Principles Global Leadership Award recipient. Farah is also no stranger to SAIIA, having interned here in 2018. So Farah, great to see you again. Over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the opportunity and a very, very warm welcome to everyone. I think that, this conversation is even more important because of the context we find ourselves in as a country. And I do think that as graduates who have had the privilege to pursue tertiary education, we do have a responsibility to see what role do we play in our society and how do we rebuild our society. So I look forward to having really open and honest conversations with you. I'm going to be really honest about what is the labor market saying and where does that then put you as graduates, and some tips in terms of how do we navigate a society where we are riddled by high levels of youth unemployment. So I'm really hoping that you'll enjoy. I do have a presentation, and I just want to check from Kaylee, from your side, are you able to see the presentation?
I don't see anything yet.
Nothing yet? Oh, I didn't press start. That's why.
Yeah, okay. I can see that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, fantastic. So my name is Farah, as Kaylee mentioned, and I work for the Youth Employment Service. Definitely, I have indeed been involved in SAIIA, both at a high school level when I was involved in Model UN for quite a number of years, and then also when I did my internship at SAIIA just after coming back from my master's. So I'm really excited to see how this has gone full circle, and I'm really looking forward to sharing some insights that we have seen at YES with all of you today. So in light of this conversation today, I really want to highlight what are the implications of a post-COVID-19 South Africa for all of us as we go through the job market, as we are navigating the complexities of this job market. And what I would like to cover with you is firstly looking at what is YES, because it's really important to understand how is it that we got the insights I'm going to share with you. Then looking at what impact we've made to date and what are some insights we're getting from the job market. And then lastly, some personal views from myself. So what young people find themselves in, and this is not only a South African problem, but a global problem, is that we find ourselves in the experience trap. And the experience trap means that we can't get a job without work experience, and we can't get work experience without a job. And we see that across the board, young people in Africa account for 60% of Africa's joblessness. And so many of these young people are stuck in this experience trap. So what do we need to do to alleviate this experience trap, right? Because research shows us that the only and best way, or one of the best ways to enhance employability is through work experience. So what YES does is that we provide unemployed youth with a 12-month work experience opportunity. We believe that this allows us to reignite South Africa's economy. We give young people, many young people, their first work experience opportunity. At the end of the program, young people emerge with a CV, a reference letter, and a completion certificate. And research, again, YES, is very much rooted in research, which is fantastic for an NGO. Research shows us that experience on a CV and a reference letter triples the likelihood of a callback within 3 months of the job search. But more than that, For young women, a reference letter doubles your chances of employment. So it's been really important for us that any youth who go through our program are able to leave the program having not only broken the experience trap, but tools which would enhance their employability. Now, a lot of people have this misperception that YES is funded by government, and this is because of the fact that a few years ago, our president announced YES and launched YES. But YES is actually funded by the private sector. And for me, that's really exciting because the current situation of our country shows us that it's no longer business as usual. Everyone has to play their part, and this means private sector needs to be as involved as addressing socioeconomic issues as government, as NGO and civil society. So how YES is funded is that corporates who want to attain their BEE level up, or corporates who want to do work for their corporate social investment, will invest in YES to create youth jobs. Now, we've been in operation for about 132 weeks. I joined YES about a year and 2 months ago, and the impact we've been able to make in such a short amount of time has been really, really incredible. To date, YES has made over 57,500 work experience opportunities for unemployed youth. This means over 57,500 families have been changed across the country. We have over 1,550 corporates who have signed up with YES. This also again proves that it's no longer business as usual, and we do have a realization from corporates of the role they need to play. And really interesting, since the unrest we've had just in the past 3 days, way more corporate signups, at times more signups than we've had in months, proving that there is this realization that, shoot, we all have to play our part. Unfortunate that it took an unrest in some cases for that realization, but glad that we are all collectively coming to the table at once. Because of the investment in youth salaries, we've been able to inject over 3.2 billion rand back into the economy. And this for me is most exciting because we do have a number of YES youth who are based within rural communities. And my own view is especially, and I'm really excited to do this work as partner management lead, is that young people don't have to leave Ratlo in the Northwest, for example, for them to be able to earn a living. Young people can stay in Ratlo, be employed with one of our partners in the area, and earn an income which is then reinvested into that local economy. And it's important that we can build our local economies. More impact, we've got about a 32% to a 42% absorption rate within YES. So what this ultimately means is that after the year has ended, where the youth had completed their work experience, about 42% of them are absorbed directly. We then did a recent call center drive with other YES youth to find out where are they after placements. And it's been interesting because a number of them have been able to find their own employment. Some others have been able to pursue their studies. And then, of course, there are a number of YES youth who are still unemployed. And our goal is to work within the youth unemployment ecosystem to find as many placements for these youth post the program as possible. We've been able to award about 500 BE level ups, and I think really exciting in learning minutes. So every YES youth gets a YES phone, which is really important in the context like South Africa, where only 41% of South Africans have smartphones. Every single YES youth gets a YES phone, and that phone is preloaded with zero-rated learning apps. And from these apps, we've got 8.9 million learning minutes, showing that young people don't only have this work experience, but they're able to keep learning on the job. So we've got this track record, we've got this impact. And what is it that our impact has shown us? And I just wanted to add in this slide with the different corporates we have who have signed up with YES to show you what are some of South Africa's largest companies saying about the youth unemployment landscape, and what is it that we are getting from the labor market. And I think this is the reality. The reality, if we just look at the quarterly labor survey for Q1 of 2021, it revealed the following. First of all, if we're looking at your levels of overall unemployment, there was a decrease to 15 million. So this means the 15 million of our people are unemployed. So this is the number of employed persons has decreased, which is really, really concerning within our country. We then also had an increase to 7.2 million, looking at the number of your unemployed persons. 62% of our population is not economically productive. And this is especially 62% of our working age population that is not economically productive or engaged. If we're looking at youth unemployment specifically, between the ages of 15 to 24, we've got an expanded youth unemployment rate of 74.7%. Now, you often hear people talk about what is the narrow definition of unemployment and what is your expanded definition of unemployment. Your narrow definition of unemployment, which is usually applied by the ILO, looks at your unemployed who are still actively looking for work. But your expanded definition of unemployment includes those who have just given up on the job search. It includes discouraged work seekers. And between young people, between 15 to 24, it's at 74.7%, which is incredibly concerning. If we're looking at those who are between the ages of 25 to 34, it's at about 51.7%. So we are in the thick of a crisis. We've been in the thick of a crisis for a long time now, and it just continues to escalate. Now, a lot of people say, but what about graduate unemployment? And we also saw an increase in graduate unemployment in the first quarter of 2021. Graduate unemployment is at 9.3%. Interestingly enough, about graduate unemployment, trends show us that this percentage remains more or less consistent over the years. So when there are influxes of graduates who enter the labor market and are initially unemployed, they always end up being much better positioned. They always end up finding employment compared to those who don't have a degree or even a diploma. So your graduate unemployment rate usually stays the same. So one way or another, you will find something, but the reality is very different for those who just have a matric or those who don't even have a matric because of many socioeconomic challenges. So this is the reality that we're looking at within our country at the moment. And so many of these indicators and stats relate to what is happening on the ground, relate to the unrest that is happening. So what is it that the labor market is telling us? What are some insights that we as YES are getting from corporates? And there are three main insights which I wanted us to highlight today. The first is that we have to remove information asymmetries, and I think an event like this speaks directly to that, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail. The second is that we have to focus on soft skills. And the third is that SMMEs need to drive job creation. And I'm hoping today to encourage many of you to pursue this route. Now, when I talk about removing information asymmetries, what we find at the moment is that there is a disconnect between information job seekers have about the labor market and what the labor market actually wants. Youth need to understand, well, what are the sort of skills I have to study to be employable? What are the sort of skills I have to gain to enhance my employability? And the labor market also has to share that. We continue to have a disconnect. We continue to, at times, have graduates in tourism, and there's so many graduates in tourism, for example, but the labor market doesn't actually need that. And that's been exacerbated by COVID-19. So how do we ensure that we are removing information asymmetries, but also how do we ensure that we are showing young people that there are so many employment pathways? If I look back to a few years ago when I was at uni, I had no idea how many employment pathways there were. And I think that is still, unfortunately, the reality today. Young people still have this idea that to be employable, to make something of myself, I have to either be a lawyer, an engineer, a doctor, or an accountant. But there are so many other employment streams for one to go into. And lo and behold, I now find myself working within the NGO space. The second insight we got from market is focus on soft skills. A lot of us only want to focus on technical skills. And I see this a lot, especially from graduates. You think you have a degree, so you're then set. You don't need to work out anything else. But the reality is that employers hire for technical skills, but fire for soft skills. If you don't have soft skills, which is effective communication, teamwork, critical thinking, creativity, if you don't have those critical skills needed in the workplace, you're then not that employable. A degree is one thing, but to enhance that degree, what are the soft skills that you have? And for graduates, definitely important to grow and build on those skills. Last insight talks about how we need SMEs to drive job creation. The reality that we share, and a few people, they get a bit upset with us as YES when we say this, but it's that the reality is that there really aren't that many jobs. Some jobs will come from the private sector, some jobs may come from government, but where the most amount of jobs will come from, if we're looking at our current economic reality, is from SMMEs. We know that SMME development and job creation are inextricably linked. And I'm going to show you this quick view now of how important it is that we get more youth-owned businesses and more support for youth-owned businesses. In the US, for example, your SMMEs contribute to 65% of your economic growth, and they have an unemployment rate of 6%. In South Africa, SMMEs contribute to 27% of economic growth, and we've got an overall unemployment rate of 33%. And I think those two pictures show you that we have to be drivers of SMMEs. We have to encourage young people to also understand that there are multiple pathways for employment. And I do hold the view, especially after being a recent university grad, that at our universities at times teach us how to be good employees. They're not instilling in us how do you be great employers. And what Africa needs across the board, not only in South Africa, is great employers. And so as I just end off with you all, my sense of encouragement to you all is to ask you to do your research on what are the current gaps that we are experiencing, to do your research in terms of what is the economy needing, not only in the South African context, but in the African context as a whole. What are high growth industries? How do I align myself with those industries? But I think more importantly, what can I contribute to? I'm a firm believer that if we want to see a changed society, we each have to play a role. And that role means we have to understand what the needs and wants are of our society. So I hope that me showing you what the labor market is asking for will help you all to position yourselves much better as you are able to transition post-university. Thanks so much, SAIIA and Cass, for the opportunity.
Thank you. That was really interesting. I think some valuable but also quite scary insights into what the labor market is looking like at the moment, but numbers that, clearly go a long way to show the kind of frustration and the situation that young people find themselves in at the moment. So thanks, Farah, for that. We were supposed to have Kathy Mosahlana join us as a third speaker. She is a radio and broadcast journalist, but unfortunately she has at the last minute had to bow out. So we are sorry not to have her here today. But I suppose on the plus side, this does leave us for more time for Q&A. And I see that we have had a number of questions come through on the chat box, and I want to try and get to as many of them as possible. So I have a question here for Ronak from Stephanie, and she asks, could you elaborate on the tools that you use to deal with task conflict and personal conflict? Sorry, Ronak, I think you are muted.
Sorry, still haven't figured that out. Yeah, I mean, look, I think everybody's going to have their own formula and their own approach to doing this, and it's up to you to kind of figure it out what works best for you. But I find personally that I prefer to be as straightforward as possible, and I prefer to put kind of cards on the table and frame an issue, based on facts. And I think, just being cognizant and being self-aware of my own behavior and how that might be perceived is also very important. So I think starting from understanding yourself is very important in terms of how you approach situations and how you might be perceived. And I think having good EQ is very important in that regard. And that's something that you just need to develop by introspecting. And then I think if you've got facts on the table and if you've got your story straight, I find often that when we play these things out in our head, when we need to have difficult conversations, they're often worse in our head than they are in reality. You sit with that anxiety, you sit with kind of all these scenarios in your head. You're probably going to do enough of that at work. So it's best just to kind of to deal with issues up front, I think. And I think it leads to healthier relationships. And most people are actually, in my experience, provided you say you say things respectfully and in the right way, are quite receptive to it.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question as well for Farah from Ruan Nordia. He asks, what measures and systems have YES put in place to ensure that youth are not exploited during their 12-month placement?
Awesome question, and really, really my favorite, because I head up the monitoring and evaluation in YES. So we've got a number of methods, and I'll try to take you through them very briefly. And if you'd like more detail, I'd be really happy to engage. The first one we do is that every YES youth receives a YES phone, and that YES phone is preloaded with 0-rated apps. One of the apps is called YES for Youth. I saw there was another question in terms of the modules. We've got 25 work readiness modules on that app, and we've got 12 entrepreneurship modules. If you'd like to know more information, really cool. They look at things like communication, how do you plan for your future, teamwork, budgeting 101, etc. The second app we have is called YES Life. YES Life has got weekly and monthly surveys. So every survey that a YES does tells us, that a youth does, tells us information about their work experience. We'll ask them behavioral questions, and we're really grateful to have had the involvement of the World Bank and some South African behavioral economists assisting us in constructing this. We'll ask some questions to say, are you feeling valued within your team? Are you able to manage your workload? Do you have the necessary support you need from your manager? So all of those questions, including the baseline and the endline survey, allow us to track consistently. We do then also, so that's the first measure, tracking through our YES apps. Secondly, we've got what we call a QWE team, a quality work experience team, who contact youth every single month from the start of their YES program right up until the end. The great thing about this team is that they're all YES youth themselves, and they work with us at the YES head offices, so they can check on the experience of the YES youth, and should there be any issues, they alert us as the senior management, and we get involved either with the client directly or the partner that the youth is placed in. The third one we've got is the supervisor app. Every single YES youth has got a supervisor, and each supervisor has got an app where they have to complete 4 surveys within that year about how the experience of that youth is going, what that youth is up to. We then have got a scorecard system. This is the 4th measure for our partners on the ground, and we can track their progress as partners, and each month we give them a score. So have they shown up for check-ins? When we have engaged with youth, has there been any negative feedback from the engagement we've got on the apps? What exactly are the youth saying? And then the 5th measure that we do have is in our business development team, who will then assess their clients based on the quality of work experience that was indeed provided. So I think from the M&E perspective, we do a really, really good job. I think we've really ensured that we're making sure youth are having a great work experience. Of course, we've had some cases where that is not the case, and we need to intervene immediately. But I must say, YES is gazetted to apply consistent monitoring and evaluation. And because we are gazetted to do so, we have to make sure we do so really well and thoroughly.
Great, thank you. And just to let our audience know as well that we will be making Farah's presentation available for download on the webpage for those that are interested. Ronak, you mentioned quite a lot the anxiety that young people face in the working world, and I think this must have really resonated with our audience, because we have a question coming through from India. She says, you mentioned having to get comfortable with ambiguity when starting a career. How do you overcome the self-doubt that comes with that? Do you support a fake it till you make it mindset?
So that's a fantastic question. I think the imposter syndrome, it comes and goes, and it will always be there. And it's up to you to develop the coping mechanisms to deal with that. And I think there is something extremely liberating by asking the question, what's the worst that can happen? And, I found that in my personal journey, you plot all these scenarios in your head, and you envisage the perfect scenario. And then when it doesn't happen, you get flustered and you panic, and all of these kind of things play out. And, at the end of the day, I had to come back to the very, very simple question, what's the worst that can happen? If it didn't work out, I would have been fine. I would have gotten another job. Something would have worked out. And I think, that is a question that can be quite liberating. I think the other question that can be quite liberating is to say, I don't know. you're not expected to know everything about everything. And I think for a long time, I really did expect to be an encyclopedia. I thought I was Wikipedia, and it's not possible. And I think people respect you more for actually saying, this is not my lane. I don't understand it, and this is something I'm not comfortable in doing, and I can get back to you with a bit more research. So I think for me, those were things that I had to get comfortable with, because I thought if I couldn't answer these types of questions, that it was a personal failure or I didn't work hard enough. And it's just, the reality is that that's not true. So I think, to Indiapo's point, I think when you get comfortable with the gray areas, you know that eventually with more data points, you'll be able to come up with something constructive. And I think in the analytical work that I do, for a long time, I used to think that being an analyst was about predicting things and being right or wrong. But that's actually not the point of an analyst. The point is to be able to develop a framework for decision makers so that they can make informed decisions based on the information available at the time. So I think these are important points, and stuff that I think you only really learn through experiences, through failing. It's very important to fail. That's where you learn the most. And I think for a long time in my career, I had a very charmed life, which made me somewhat complacent. So I think I think it's of course dependent on every person and how they deal with things. But I think those two questions for me really helped me.
Great, thank you. Coming back to you, Farah, in the work that you're doing on Yes, we have a question from Samkelisiwe Makubela. She asks, what are the learning apps offered by Yes, and what skills do they enhance?
Awesome. So we've got, so like I mentioned before, there's the two learning apps. So there's the Yes for Youth app and the Yes Life app. Yes for Youth is really, really my favorite learning app because it's got 25 work readiness modules and 12 entrepreneurship modules. Some of the modules will cover some aspects like budgeting 101, effective communication, teamwork, how do I whoop my future? So how do I plan for my future? How do I build a decent CV? How do I go for interviewing skills? So once again, with this app as well, we worked with the World Bank and some behavioral economists. I think what's really exciting about the app is that youth can learn in real time. So like I shared in the beginning, we've got 57,500 Yes Youth across multiple industries. So some Yes Youth are working as entry-level healthcare workers. Some youth are working as analysts and consultants. We've got some other youth who are working as teacher assistants in schools. And all of these industries have got varying times where one can take out their phone to learn. And because youth are able to learn on their Yes phones in real time, we've seen that some young people would like to learn in the evenings, some can learn during working hours. So I think that really, really is important with the app. The second thing is that we've got a blended learning format. So we understand that unemployed youth are not at all a homogeneous group, and everyone learns very differently. So some of our content in the modules is presented in terms of text, some others is in terms of videos, animations, voice notes. They are in our 12 official languages. So there's a lot of mix in the languages which are there. A lot of the videos themselves have got Yes Youth who have been through the program, who can speak to their experience. So yeah, I mean, I think it's really exciting on the Yes phones. If any of you would like to test out one of the apps, I'm sure I can chat to our team about just providing you with access. Really, really fun as well. And yeah, I think that, yeah, I'm a big fan of the Yes phones. I think that the more we can empower young people with a 4IR tool in their hand, especially in comparison to the rest of the country, the more empowered country we can create.
Farah, you started the Africa Matters initiative when you were still at university, and I know, Ronak, you mentioned also venturing into entrepreneurship. We have a question from Inkanise Simalane. He asks, what advice or tips would you give to youth who want to start businesses while studying? And I think that's something that you both could probably speak to. So maybe, Farah, you want to give that a go first?
Awesome. Sure. I think that question is really, really important. And I especially love that the question looks at at how do we start our own businesses while we are pursuing our studies. I think that's really important. I think too often society has got this idea that your entrepreneur has got to have years of experience or years of corporate experience before they can actually create something sustainable. So I think it's definitely possible. I would say that it is, at least from my perspective, what is important with Africa Matters, which is a social enterprise, is to say, how do we build a structure that lasts? And that meant we had to go back to basics, which is looking at a business model canvas, looking at how are we sustainable, how are we able to have revenue, how do we know what our expenditure is, who are our partners, who are our competitors. And then really one of my closest friends is now the CEO of Africa Matters, and I've had to take a step back because of the work I'm doing at YES. And my hope one day is that we'd be able to get the organization to such a point where Rianne runs fully as the CEO and I'm fully supporting her as the CFO. But I don't think Africa Matters would still be here today if I did not have a strong partner who I could rely on in terms of growing the business. Last thing I'd say is you have to be resilient and you have to see a vision that others don't see. I can't tell you how many pitches I've had. I know Ronak mentioned it was in the UK. I did my master's in the UK and I remember being able to pitch. And all those investors looked at me like, how on earth do you quantify empowerment of African youth? And I was so frustrated because here I am, I can see the vision. I've done it so many times before, but they don't understand anything I'm speaking about. And it was so easy to be discouraged, but we persisted, we carried on. 1 month ago, we received our first ever international grant for a really large sum amount of money, which really enables us to empower the teams we work with. In addition to that, we've actually just two days ago, we were just approached by a French organization to roll out a continental social entrepreneurship competition. So again, so many opportunities come, but you have to stay committed to what you believe in, despite the resistance you may face.
Ronak?
Yeah, I think Farah's covered it pretty well. I think the two elements that stand out for me, I think to be successful in business, you need to ask yourself, what problem are you solving? And I think if you can solve a problem for people, you're going to make money significantly. And this is a continent where you can do well and you can do good. And I think what we're seeing in Africa is because we've got so many significant societal challenges and social needs, innovation is driven by necessity. And I think that's a very important point, particularly in the digital economy. So I think that's the first starting point, because there's no point starting a business which is either done before or saturated, or you don't have a comparative advantage, because then you're just wasting resources and time. And I would encourage you all to read a book called Smart Cuts, which by an author called Shane Snow, which really changed the way I thought about things, because it's about how do you achieve maximum impact in the shortest amount of time by hacking the ladder. And they talk about waves, they talk about superconnectors, and concepts that really, allow you to accelerate very quickly, because we don't have the luxury of time in Africa to solve problems. So I think that's the first point. And the second point that I've realized is you are the power of your network. And the people around you is extremely important, whether it's through references, whether it's through the ability to raise finance, to borrow capital, whether it's just through emotional support, non-financial support. If you mine your network properly, and you're just nice to people, this plays up in ways that you see only way down the line. That's when the dots connect. And I find that a lot of people these days are very transactional in the way that they approach things, especially young people. And I think that's really not the right mindset. I think when you start your career, you should be like a sponge. You should absorb as much as possible, build relationships, because those relationships carry through and play out in ways that are not necessarily immediate. So I think those would be the two things that I'd add.
Thanks, Ronak. Sorry, my internet just dropped off there for a minute, but I seem to be back now. I have two last questions for each of you, which I really want to get with, seeing that time is on our side. This one is for Ronak from Ruan Nordia. He asks, what would African solutions to African problems look like? This area requires urgent attention and pragmatic imagination.
Yeah, it does. It's a broad question, but it requires agency, and it requires taking some kind of control of your own future. And, we are in a very paradoxical reality where the state is a big part of our problems on the African continent, but it's also, through COVID, a big part of the solution. And the reach and the relevance has been enhanced through the pandemic. But I think the reality is that we are the youngest continent with the oldest leadership. The average age gap is 40 years. This is not a sustainable state of affairs. What I've termed this is the Facebook versus the facelift generation. The status quo is not sustainable, and I think what we require really is a sense of agency and a sense of ownership. The solutions, I think, again, would be back solved from this urgent priority of creating jobs and opportunities for young people. I think the best representation of that is through the Continental Free Trade Agreement, because it provides a vision of the future. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit, and I think incrementally, even though we've got this broad target that often seems out of reach, it gives us something to aspire to. I think in particular, those areas that I mentioned in terms of the digital economy, in terms of the creative economy, in terms of these sectors, I think there's huge opportunity over there. But I think for too long, we've had these very lazy narratives around Africa about, we're perpetually dependent on the West. We're subject to boom and bust scenarios. It's quite obvious what we need to do, right? We need to integrate regionally. We need to diversify our economies. We need to kind of build a more strong, robust private sector, create environments that are more conducive to investment, savings, and growth, and the expansion of the middle class. On a macro level, that's all it's all obvious. But I think the mindset shift is very important, because if we wait as bystanders, and if we don't take matters into our own hands as young people, then I think we're just going to be forever this perpetually this continent of laggards, and it's a ticking time bomb then. So I think there's no one size fits all approach to that question, because Africa's not. You don't have a one size fits all policy with regards to the African continent. But I think for me, the big thing that I would stress is there's power in networks, and we have the big L of leadership, which is all the big grand stuff. It's building hospitals, it's the Elon Musk stuff, it's all this grand vision. But then there's also the small L of leadership, which is about paying it forward and impacting your communities and the people around you and doing things like that. So I think and that speaks to the point about significance, is we need significant leadership.
Great, thank you. Farah, one last question for you, also from Ruan Nordia. He asks, what is the median salary for youth obtaining employment via YES initiatives?
Awesome. So with the YES program, the average salary that a YES youth would get is set at minimum wage, so it's 3,760 per YES youth. What we do find, though, is that when you do have some corporates who are hiring for jobs which require a higher skill level, then that amount can go as high as about 55,000 per youth, just based on the job that they are doing. I think it's also important to understand that within the YES landscape, about 16% of YES youth are graduates who have got their diplomas or their degrees. Then we've got about 31% of YES youth who have a matric. Then the rest of YES youth were just unable to complete their studies. So the focus for us on YES is primarily on those who are often excluded from so many of these graduate programs which corporates are running. So for many yes youth, it is their first time ever working. So hence it's been important to us to see, can we create as many opportunities as possible? But of course, when we do have some clients who are recruiting for youth with a higher skill level, then it is definitely possible to recruit those youth and place them on a higher earning salary.
Cool, thank you. That brings us to the end of our Q&A session. Thank you to both of our speakers for sharing such rich insights. I'm sure it would have been incredibly helpful to our audience. I know I certainly took a lot away from the session, so thank you. And speaking of career paths, I mean, by now, many of you will know that SAIIA and CAS run a joint scholarship. It's been running since 1999. That creates the opportunity for students looking to do their master's degree and also gain some professional work experience at the same time. And we are very excited to announce that applications for the scholarship for 2022 will be open very soon. And for more on the application process, the current CAS scholars have actually put together a short clip on what to expect and what the application process is like. So I invite you now to watch that video and gain some insight.
Founded in 1934, SAIIA is South Africa's premier research think tank on international issues. SAIIA's work spans foreign policy, economic policy, governance, social development, and the environment, linking African perspectives with global insights. More importantly, SAIIA provides an open platform for both the government and the public to engage with these issues and facilitates discussions with a wide variety of partners.
German political organization named after Germany's first chancellor. The foundation operates worldwide with the aim to promote democracy through political education and training. While the internship is funded by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, it's hosted by the South African Institute of International Affairs. Successful applicants to the internship will be placed under one of the Institute's 6 programs.
These are African governance and diplomacy, economic diplomacy, foreign policy, governance of Africa's resources, or SAIIA Futures. Your placements in these programs are dependent on your field of study and research interests.
The duration of the scholarship is 1 year.
You need the academic qualifications to pursue a master's in South Africa. Applicants should be from the SADC region and should be eligible to study in South Africa.
Applicants need to submit a writing sample, academic transcripts, 2 letters of recommendation, and a letter of motivation.
Work experience is not a requirement, but it will strengthen your application for these scholarships.
The scholarship amount includes up to 50,000 rands of tuition fees paid directly to the university and an 11,000 rand monthly stipend paid directly to the student. The 11,000 rand monthly stipend covers your rent, your transportation costs, and other living expenses.
You would have to apply for the scholarship before being accepted at the university, as the deadline for submission is in October.
Applications open on the 15th of July at noon.
Depending on COVID, the deadline for applications is in October.
Please do your research on CAS and SAIIA as respective organizations and ask questions. This is during your interview process.
Be well organized and have exceptional time management skills. This is because you'll be managing what is essentially a full-time internship on one hand and your full-time academic program at the same time, and you'll be expected to do well on both fronts.
To be solution orientated, and to always keep yourself familiar with current affairs.
Do your tasks as they come and have a detailed schedule and set a gazillion reminders just in case you forget.
Don't be afraid to make mistakes. These are the most rewarding and growth-defining moments during your scholarship. It prepares you really well for the world of work, and this is a wonderful opportunity. So the very best of luck.
So you've heard it from our current CAS scholars themselves. Of course, if there are any outstanding questions about the scholarship or the application process, there is also a dedicated email address that we are going to post in the chat box, and you can feel free to contact our scholars directly about any questions that you have. But yeah, I mean, as someone who's been through the program themselves, I think it's a really wonderful opportunity, and I would encourage those who meet the requirements to apply. I'm now going to hand over to Ms. Minenhle Nene. She is one of the current CAS scholars, and she's going to do our closing and thanks.
Well, that concludes our careers event. We'd like to extend a huge thank you to our speakers, Ronak and Farah, for sharing their career journeys. And of course, thank you to all the attendees. This event would not have been possible without CAS and SAIIA, and to them we are really, really grateful. We encourage you to please look at the event website. The link will be in the chat box below, and it will also be shared on social media. There are several great career resources that we have compiled, such as scholarship opportunities, CV writing tips, as well as online interview tips. Applications for the CAS SAIIA scholarship will be opening soon. For more information, please follow CAS and SAIIA on social media. Thank you once more for joining us. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Be safe.